Join me today for another book review, this time Uranium by Tom Zoellner. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bob, and today we're going to be doing a book review of the book Uranium by Tom Zoellner. So, yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory what this book's about. It's about the uranium. So, uh, we're a little more in-depth on what the book is about. It covers the history of uranium, focuses a lot on the more recent, say last century, world history of uranium. Obviously, it talks about the bomb at some point, and a lot of it is talking about the how like the U.S. and the Soviets began their race to gather lots and lots of uranium, and what they, their intended use, and talks about the development of uranium into a weapon, and like the amount that it required, the size of the building that it took to build for all the centrifuges, and the process to process the uranium into something that you could be used in a weapon. Because for those of you who don't know, and I'm only going to be very brief on this, only certain isotopes of uranium are viable for weapons, and in any given sample of uranium just out of the ground, there's multiple isotopes. You have to separate out the one that you need, and then refine it into a metal, typically a sphere. So, uh, goes into that quite a bit, and has a number of anecdotes. The parts I found interesting were actually one is towards the end of World War II. Well, one is explaining that the Germans basically stood no chance of making a bomb during World War II. They hit a snag at one point, had an accident of sorts, burned down a building, I believe, or had a major fire, and kind of realized that they can't control this stuff. And yeah, that kind of put the kibosh on the whole thing. Unless I'm misremembering, I believe it was actually shut down by uh, by by the chancellor himself. So they don't know if I'm allowed to say his name on here. Don't want to find out if I'm wrong. You guys know him, funny little mustache man. So, uh, although the man himself not too funny, they kind of look like Charlie Chaplin. I'll put you that way. Not as tall. So the U.S., however, proceeded and made the bomb. Now, the Germans, at the end of the war, sent a submarine loaded with all the uranium they had refined and the schematics that they had drawn up and some other things, put them onto a submarine, and its job was to go to Japan so the Japanese could continue to fight the good fight. However, as the submarine was in transit, Germany surrendered. So the captain of the submarine had a choice to make, because now, technically, he's a pirate, because he's now flying colors for a nation that no longer exists. Well, a faction anyway. So they turned themselves over to the Allies, and they came into New York or New Jersey, surrendered, and one of the guys on board was trying to tell the Americans what was actually on the ship. And so it sat there for a while with basically nobody guarding it. And then eventually someone listened to him and like, oh, yeah, we should probably like grab all that and, keep it, guard it. So the author says the timeline probably doesn't work, but there is an incredibly slim chance that that uranium did find its way to Japan, just not in the way that the Germans hoped it would. So you can probably figure out what I'm talking about there. But he said the timeline probably doesn't work for that, but slim possibility. So then after the war, the Soviets realized the power of what we created, and were also well on their way to making their own version of the bomb. So they had to try to gather up as much uranium as they could, just like we did. Now, our two two countries. Well, the Soviet Union is not really a country; it's a union, a coalition, if you will. Uh, they we took wildly different approaches. They took the typical commie approach and took a bunch of political dissidents and prisoners that they'd sentenced to the gulag, and instead, places that they knew were highly concentrated uranium. And like they mentioned, this one particular place that had famous spas, and well, that tingling, energizing feeling you were getting was in fact radiation. So underneath the place, there were formations of all kinds of radioactive isotopes, and so they sent people in there with basically no protection to mine them, and because they don't care about human life at all, so you know, as I don't remember who said it, but you can accomplish lots of things if you've got a whole bunch of people you really don't care about, which is terrible, but human history kind of bears that one out. Terribly so. I'm not condoning it at all. Be crystal clear on that. But the U.S. took a different approach. We took the capitalist approach. We paid people to find uranium. And so people in the Southwest, you could just go into gas stations and buy Geiger counters and comb the desert, hoping to hear that kind of crackling noise that says, hey, you found something radioactive, which should also tell you, hey, you should leave. This will kill you. Um, and yeah, so we, found deposits here and there and wherever, and the government was buying up uranium from people. Now, that did eventually come to a stop, and part of the reason for that was that we eventually hit a point where we had well in excess of 10,000 weapons, as did the Soviets. And I think we kind of realized that, yeah, this is probably enough. Like, the arms race is kind of silly at this point. So it's like, okay, I can destroy the world 5 times over instead of 4. Like, beyond 1 is kind of redundant. So, it wasn't as much use for it. And we found a few stable locations that had massive amounts of it. One of them is in Africa, which is also, it's not guarded at all. You can just go in and get stuff, apparently. And we're kind of concerned that people have been doing that, and we haven't been able to track it. So, yeah, you got that. But yeah, it's an overall interesting book. Well written, well researched. If you wanted to know more about uranium and how we've acquired the stockpiles we've acquired, our approach versus the Soviets, those are the main two that are discussed in the book. A little bit about the weapons themselves. I believe there are parts about also power generation and just the general global attitude towards these things. It's a very interesting book in my opinion. So I think it's definitely worth checking out if you're at all interested on the topics. But it is pretty straightforward, and it's not I don't think it's a super long book. Let me check here real quick. Yeah, the hardback. Before we get to the sources and notes on sources, the acknowledgement, like the meat of the book is 293 pages. So, yeah. And, it talks about a few things that have happened since then, and, some fears of what else could potentially happen. Yeah. So overall, I thought it was a very interesting book, but I find things like this interesting in and of itself. I mean, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I have a book about salt. Got a book about gold. Just how these various elements and minerals have helped shape the world and the rush to get them and use them and things like that. I find it all interesting, so that's why I read books like that. But anyway, if you feel like checking it out, there'll be a link down the bottom, probably for an Amazon affiliate link. If you want to help us out, go through that. Otherwise, your library might have it. You might be able to find it online somewhere. But if you have an interest in this kind of thing, I'd say it's worth checking out. But let me know down in the comments what you think. Like, share, subscribe. This is YouTube, all that fun stuff. But otherwise, see you folks out there somewhere.